Welcome. What we will do in this demonstration is to again draw a simple landscape with different planes. So now we have seen in some demonstrations, how you can draw different planes, and that always makes the drawing look more interesting. So what I will do is to again, start by laying down our closest plane. So essentially what you want to do is to first lay down the plane that is closest to the viewer, because what will happen is that the other planes will kind of hide behind this plane. So I start by laying down, this is the plane for this drawing that is closest to the viewer. And what I will do is to also have a path that kind of goes along this plane and goes down in the distance. So I will start and have a line something like this for the path. So this is the kind of path that is going and kind of going behind this plane over here. So that is a kind of drawing we have. So let me darken the plane line. So this is the plane and this is the path that is going behind this front plane. And then I will have another plane that is kind of on the side over here, and then I will have one more plane at a distance over here, something something like this. So this is how easily you can put down different planes, and you can essentially have a nice landscape composition. So even without doing any other element, just by putting down these different planes and just adding some grass or some ground cover, you can have a simple nice landscape. What we will do in this demonstration is to have few trees on these planes. So I will start by adding a bit of this trunk for this one plane, and then I will add one more tree over here. And as you can see, what I like to do is to have different size of my trees and in different positions, right? So this is a bit far, so it's a bit smaller, and this bit closer, so it's a bit bigger. So have different sizes in different locations. It adds interest to the drawing. So and then I will add this tree on the farthest plane, one over here and then over here. Again, so just to recap, you first lay down your original, your closest plane that is closest to the viewer, and then you have other lines that start from, the line of the closest plane to define the other plane. So now in this case, I had a path, and then I wanted some other plane that is behind the path. So I laid down my path like this, and then I have this line starting from the path. So essentially it indicates that the path is in front and this other plane is behind it. And then I have my last plane, the furthest out plane, start from this point and over here. So this is the plane, this plane is behind this and this plane. So this is how you can easily establish the order of the plane. And what I can do is I can simply, also add one more trunk right over here. So as you can see, now I should not have darkened this line, because now this line cuts across my trunk, so I'll have to hide it in my shading. But this is why I lay down the other plane lines as dotted lines, so that we can have any other elements cross those plane lines. And once we are done with the elements that cross those lines, then we can darken those plane lines at the very end. So once we have this, let's start to kind of darken our tree trunks like this, something like this. And then what I will do is to next kind of draw the foliage for these trees. And what I will do is to use that parallel line foliage approach that we have seen in another demonstration. Again, to recap, you can use these kind of parallel lines to define the foliage for a tree. So what you first need to do is to have a kind of overall shape for the foliage. So this will be my overall shape for this tree, and then I can have something like like this for this tree. So just have a dotted line, lay down your outline of the foliage for the trees, something like this. And then what you start to do is to start to use these small parallel lines like this to essentially kind of give an indication of foliage for these trees. So that's what I will start with this tree, and I lay down this small set of lines like this. So again, you're not looking at big lines across the tree, but small set of lines. And then what you do is to overlap them like this. And what happens is that as you have another set over the first, you get this dark area. So essentially, once you draw a first set, anytime you have two overlapping set of lines, this is darker because you have more density of lines over here compared to here. And this kind of variation in the density is what starts to give it a feel of foliage. So here again, I will have one more set of lines, and as you can see, as I'm adding more lines, it is acquiring a variation in the tone, darkness and lightness within, and this is kind of giving it a feel of foliage. So I just keep adding lines, and I'm trying to conform to the outer shape that I drew for my foliage. And again, at the edge, try to leave it so you can even add a bit of dots over here. So sometimes when you have a line, it defines a very fixed outline. We don't want that, so at the end I can even add a bit of dots over here to give it a open airy feel. And then again I go ahead and just add a bit more of these lines like this. So there we have it. This is how simply you can just add these parallel lines and draw a quick, foliage of a tree. So there we have it. And I'll do the same for this tree as well, right? So the approach is the same. I just use these parallel lines and I start to kind of, draw on the outline of the foliage shape that I drew, and then I keep adding small set of other lines like this in between. And as you can see, as I'm adding more parallel lines, I'm starting to get that different tone in there, because now the two lines are overlapping, and that creates it darker tone than just the one set of lines. And then I'll go back, and if I want, I can add a bit more here and there. Just keep adding, playing around with it, adding a different line here, a bit of set of lines over here, another set over here, and then soon you will start to get a feel of foliage come in there. And again, the thing to keep in mind is that the effect of foliage is coming because you have these darker spots, and lighter spots and things like that, right? So it's the kind of variation in the tone in there that is giving it a nice feel of foliage. And in the end, if I want, again, I can go ahead and can just add a bit of you can even add a bit of strokes like these, these small strokes at the end to give it a nice feel of foliage at the edge. So your foliage will not look stiff, because of the parallel line sometimes can make the end a bit stiff, right? So but you want to have an open airy feel. That's what we do. And also at the point where the trunk and the foliage intersect, or where the foliage starts, darken it a bit, because this spot kind of is always a bit darker. So there, just by adding these lines, and changing the tonal variation in between, and adding a bit of this kind of small marks at the end, now we can easily give a feel of foliage for this for the trees. And we'll do the same for the other three trees as well. So again, simply I start using these parallel lines, add one set, and then I overlay some more lines, and there we have it, right? So just by adding a bit more lines like this, I'm able to give it a nice quick feel of foliage. So again, what we're doing with this technique is to give a nice feel for the foliage for the distant trees, again. So this is the kind of closeness that you can use for this technique to work. But if you have a tree that is much up closer, then you actually need to show the more of the foliage detail, and which is where you use that scribbly stroke that we have seen in other demonstrations. So for the tree that is at a bit of a distance, what you need to show is the darkness and lightness and a kind of feel for the foliage, and that is what this kind of approach of parallel lines, that is what it provides. So I'll use the same for this tree over here as well, and I'll go ahead and use these parallel lines like this over here. And again, I use this different set of overlapping lines to give the tonal variation, and that quickly gives us a feel for the foliage. And there we have it. And now for the final tree, so I'll use the same approach. An initial set of parallel lines, and drawing that outline, as you can see, helps, because now you know where to draw your parallel lines. And then I go in between, and then I add a bit more lines, essentially add some. And also remember not to add your darkness in a straight line. Always make it a curve. So for example, here, like this curve, so here I have a bit of randomness to this darkness and lightness. So again, here, add one here, move, add one here, add one here, a little bit here. So as you keep moving your hand and keep adding new lines, new set of parallel lines in different areas, you will have that kind of nice variation of tone that gives the foliage depth in a tree. So it's kind of nice tonal variation that helps you kind of establish the feel of foliage, and the depth in the foliage comes from that tonal variation. So it's very, very essential to have that kind of variation. So here I have a darker spot, lighter, dark. So that kind of variation, as you practice more, you will be able to see it evolve, and you will be able to kind of you will know when that variation is there, and when you're getting a feel for the foliage. So there, just by adding a bit more lines. And as you can see, here my edges is a bit harsh. So essentially, it's a very harsh edge. So what I can do, again, I can add a bit of loops, something like this to the edges. Again, just marks, random marks like this, to make the foliage a bit open and airy. So this kind of open and airy feel is always good to have, because this makes it more believable, and makes our mind interpret it as more of foliage than just kind of some kind of static shape. So there we have it. So this is a quick foliage we did. And next we will essentially texture the trunks. So for the far out trees, what I do is I simply add a layer of jagged darkness, as we have seen in other demonstrations. So you simply add a layer of jagged darkness for these far out trees. So again, add it, make it jagged. Again, don't make it uniform, and then leave a layer of white on the other side, and this kind of gives us a feel of roundness for the bark or the trunk, and a bit of jaggedness gives us feel for the bark texture. And for the other trunks that are a bit bigger, what I will do is to use these kind of wiggly lines. So again, we have seen these wiggly lines in other demonstrations. So these are in a very quick, effective way to essentially kind of lay the bark texture for trunks that are not too big and not too small. So here, like this, I can very quickly lay the bark texture for these trunks. And again, what we need to do is darken one end more. Again, so always darken one end of the trunk more than the other to bring out its roundness. And I'll use the same wiggly stroke over here to darken, to create the bark texture for this trunk. So again, I lay down one initial layer of bark texture, and then I darken one end like this over here. And then what you can also do is to add a bit of jaggedness to the other edge, closer to the white. So this also kind of brings out the feel of roughness for the bark and a bit more depth as well for the trunk. So again, I add a bit of jaggedness to the trunk. So there we have it. And finally, I'll use the same wiggly lines to add the texture for this trunk as well. There, so that's how quickly you can simply draw the bark texture and the trunk, and using the parallel lines, we lay down the foliage for our. And again, sometimes what you will feel is that the foliage is a bit small compared to the trunk. So this is my trunk and this is foliage. I feel a bit small. Then you can always add a bit more foliage to give the foliage and the trunk the right proportion. So essentially, for this trunk is I would say around 2/3 the size of the foliage. So essentially the trunk is smaller than the overall foliage, but so you just do that over here. So, and if you want, you can always adjust the size of the foliage later on just by adding a bit more parallel lines. There we have. So this is done, and what now I can do is essentially kind of highlight my outline of the plane, so I can darken it now like this. And this is my path going down, so I can darken my path as well. And now we can, if you want, we can add a bit more background over here, or we can define a bit of more of the ground for the planes, and add some kind of ground cover that as we have seen in other tutorials. So again, what I like to do is to have some kind of backdrop over here, right? And we have seen a lot of different ways to do it, and the easiest and the simplest and the most effective thing that I like is to again draw a distant tree line using the parallel lines like this. So I like it because it just is very simple to do, but it's also very effective in terms of having a distant place where our eyes can rest. So that's what I will do. I will simply add these parallel lines over here just to indicate a kind of tree line behind this tree over here. And also you can darken the base a bit more, because in a distant tree line, the base always receives less light than the top. And I also like to make it a bit kind of tapered, right? So it ends right here, something like this. So there we have it. And also keep vary their height. Don't make this bit straight, but kind of something like this. So that's what I've done over here. And then if you want, you can add one more, and then taper it and end right over here like this. So this is a nice a simple way to kind of create a distant tree line that is a nice place for the eyes to rest as they travel the drawing. So there we have it. And what we will do is now is to essentially define the path, and the path can be simply defined by adding these again parallel lines that kind of reduce with the distance. So as you go from here, you can see that these lines are reducing, so that give an impression of distance. So this helps to bring out the path. And I will darken this plane line a bit more over here just to give it a nice definition. And then now next, in the end, we will add a bit of ground cover to these different planes. And again, we have seen in other demonstrations, first you have to define the ground form. So essentially lay down, how the ground, and the way you do it is to use these lines to essentially kind of, lay down the ground form. And so I'll do that for this plane. I'll just simply use these lines like this over here. So as you can see, what happens is that when you use these lines, now we have a better understanding of the ground form for the plane. So again, this is white over here. That's not telling us, how the ground is. And again, just by adding a kind of, these kind of slightly curved parallel lines, it gives us a better indication of the ground So that's how it is, just by adding these kind of parallel lines, our ground starts to kind of, acquire a more form in our eyes. And I'll do the same for this plane as well. This is the closest to us. And again, just by adding these lines, now you can see that, now we have a better understanding of the ground form compared to when it was, just white. And finally, what we do is to add some kind of cover, ground cover, and the easiest way is to use this kind of simple grass stroke that we have seen in other demonstration, right? So this is the simplest way to add a kind of simple grass stroke and to add some kind of ground cover to make these ground more interesting. So I'll go ahead and start adding a bit of grass like this. And again, the thing to notice is that I'm just adding a bit here, a bit there. The whole idea is to have a bit of this kind of indication of grass on the ground, and that's starts to give the notion of the whole ground as grass cover. So our mind starts to interpret this as having this plane, this ground as having kind of grass cover. And again, you do it simply like this, slightly angular lines. So these are not parallel lines. Don't do it like this, but like this. And also use two different, so one and then other, so this kind of one clump like this. So this is what you do quickly, and we have seen this in a lot of other demonstrations, how you can quickly use this technique to create a nice kind of ground cover. And we also need to define that we also need to kind of ground the trunks. So when the trunk goes in the ground, you need to create a bit of darkness at the spot to provide a nice transition for the trunk to the ground. So that's what we do over here. So I essentially darken that spot, and as you can see, darkening that spot helps us ground the trunk and makes the drawing look much more appealing. So I'll use the same. Over here the trunk doesn't really look grounded because that's where it ends, but just by adding a bit of darkness using these small lines or the grass stroke, you can ground that trunk, and again that looks much more appealing. So that's what we did over there, and we'll do the same for these two trunks over here as well, right? So I'll just kind of use this stroke to ground these trees. So again, just a few stroke here, few stroke there, and bit of kind of darkening of the base helps to ground the trunks there. So you can already see that the trunk is beginning to look rounded, and just a bit more, and there. So essentially, that kind of dark spot near where the trunk goes in the ground really helps to clearly establish it being grounded. So that is very, very easy to do and really helps to contribute in making the drawing much more attractive and polished. So I will do and ground this trunk similarly as well. So there we have it. We grounded the trunk, and then finally what we can do now is to add a bit more of ground cover to these planes by using the same grass stroke over here. So again, simply just keep your hand moving, add a bit of grass, bit stroke here, something like this, right? And you can easily add a feel of grass to the ground and make the drawing more interesting. So again, these simple things like the ground cover, they all contribute in making the drawing have a more authentic feel. So that's what we will do. Just instead of leaving the plane, just adding a bit of this stroke like this helps to establish a kind of ground cover and helps to look the drawing more polished. So that's what I do. So quickly, just by adding a few stroke here, few stroke there, this ground looks as if it has a kind of grass on it, and is much nicer to look at. And we'll do the same for this closest plane to us. But what we will also do is to use a bit of tall grass like this to kind of establish a bit more of kind of a tall grassy feel. So what I do actually, so I first start by laying a bit of layer of this kind of grass, the small grass stroke that we have used before. So I just start by laying down a layer of that over here. And then what you can do is you can add other elements on top, like tall grass or a wildflower or other elements you can lay down on top of it. So first just always put down this small layer of grass to at least have a minimal ground cover. So again something like this, right? So this is very simple stroke, and once you start to do it and once you start to get practice with it, then you can do it pretty fast like I'm doing, right? I just move my hand here a bit there and here, then you can start to see your ground as grass covered already. So again, so you see how I'm giving a suggestion, a bit of grass here, a bit of grass there, and that's beginning to feel like a nice ground covered with grass, right? So this is the kind of suggestion you should aim at. So it doesn't overpower the drawing. So in a sense, the whole tone is still light, but the ground is still looks as nicely grass covered. And once we have that, then what we can do is we can add a bit other stuff on it. So to give a feel for tall grass, essentially add again this kind of, a tall grass stem. So you can add that as well over here like this. And always remember to ground it by using this wiggly line at the base, and then if you want, you can add a bit of, something like this. So there we have it. Just by adding this a few of these, you can start to give a feel for, a bit of tall grass on the ground as well, right? There we have it. So now you can see that just by adding a few of these lines and grounding them, and having a bit darker at the top, like seed pod or something, you can start to give a bit of, feel for the tall grass as part of the ground right there. And you can even can make that into a wildflower. So for the wildflower, you use a stem, and then you have a flower like this, right? So you can even add more, add some wildflowers over here as well. For example, like this, I can add a wildflower over here as well. So this is completely, something that you can enjoy evolving, so essentially I can add a bit of ground flower, then I add a bit of grass. The other thing to keep in mind is that as you go out in the distance, to make these things smaller. So for example, if I want to add a wildflower over here, I will make it much smaller in size over here, something like this. So this now gives a sense of perspective, a distance that in the wildflower that are a bit further out in the plane, they are smaller than the one closer. And always remember to stem them, to ground them. And you can even add a bit of grass at the bottom to kind of ground them as well over there. So here, just by adding a bit of grass, I create a bit of dark spot, and then the stems, they come out from the dark spot, so they look grounded, and it creates a nice feeling of a small patch of wildflower. So this is kind of small things you do in a planning to make it interesting. And then we have a bit bigger flowers and kind of tall grass over here. Right here. So if I want, again, I can add a bit of this grassy stroke at the bottom to again highlight it. So essentially what you do is, you use this grassy stroke to essentially highlight any part of the ground that, that has a special different kind of ground cover to highlight it. So I can just add a bit of, again, something like this, small. And then here, it starts to, again, get attention now, because this is becoming a bit darker. So in your drawing, any spot that is darker catches attention. And then you can use that to kind of, move the viewer's eyes through your drawing. So that's what I did quickly over here. So just by adding a bit of small grass stroke, or even if you want, you can just add a bit of dot, small marks like this. I'm able to create an attention at this spot. So now this is looking like tall grass with some wildflowers, and then we have another spot over here, and it's smaller in distance, so now our eyes see the distance, the perspective properly. So this is how quickly we can create a simple drawing that has different planes that are overlapping, receding, and then we drew some 5 trees with their foliage and trunks quickly in under 30 minutes. And the last thing that we can do is to also give some more kind of ground cover on the path itself, right? So this is a path that is going down this front plane, and you can again draw some kind of wildflowers over here, or a bit of grass, something like this. Again, just kind of experiment, a bit of grass, a bit of wildflowers over here, ground them with a wiggly thing at the base, so a bit of ground flowers, and then just add a bit of grass over here, and at the end, if you want, you can darken it a bit just to bring out its form. So there we have it, and then I'm adding a bit of grass again like this. So as you can see, again, just by adding a bit of grass and a bit of flowers, your path now looks a bit more kind of grass covered, or wildflower covered path, and has a much nicer appeal than just being bland with no cover. So there we have it, a quick simple landscape where we'll learn how to draw those different receding planes, and how to draw the tree foliage using the parallel lines like this, and the tree trunks we did using this kind of jagged darkness, and also this kind of wiggly lines. And finally we saw how you can define the ground form using these lines, and then cover the ground with the grass and the wildflower to create a nice simple landscape in under 30 minutes. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.